Ethan used to believe that anger was just part of who he was, something automatic and uncontrollable, like a reflex that fired whenever someone disrespected him, ignored him, or simply didn't act the way he expected. And for years he lived like that, reacting instantly, raising his voice, holding grudges, replaying arguments in his mind long after they were over, until one day something small but powerful shifted inside him, when a coworker publicly blamed him for a mistake he didn't make. And instead of exploding the way he normally would, he paused for just a second, not because he had mastered his emotions yet, but because he was tired. Tired of the constant stress. Tired of feeling like other people had a remote control over his mood. Tired of letting every little thing ruin his day. And in that pause, he realized something that would slowly change. His life. The situation itself wasn't forcing him to feel angry. His reaction was, and that thought stayed with him as he walked home that evening, playing over and over in his mind, because if his reaction was the real source of his anger, then maybe he had more control than he ever thought. So he began experimenting with a new approach, not trying to suppress anger or pretend it didn't exist, but observing it like an outsider, noticing how it rose, how his thoughts fueled it, how his ego whispered things like, "You need to prove yourself," or "You can't let them get away with that." And instead of immediately obeying those thoughts, he started questioning them, asking himself whether reacting would actually improve anything or just add more chaos. And slowly, through many imperfect attempts, he began to build a new habit of stepping back before responding. Sometimes taking a breath, sometimes staying silent, sometimes choosing words that came from clarity instead of impulse. And something unexpected started to happen. People who once triggered him lost their power, not because they changed, but because he did, and he began to see that most people's behavior wasn't really about him at all. It was about their own stress, insecurities, and unspoken struggles. And this realization created a strange kind of freedom inside him. Because if their actions were a reflection of them, then he didn't have to take everything personally anymore. And without that personal attachment, the fire of anger had nothing to feed on. And over time, Ethan became someone who could stay calm even in situations that would have once pushed him over the edge, not by becoming cold or emotionless, but by becoming aware, choosing his responses instead of being dragged by his impulses, and understanding that true strength wasn't in reacting loudly, but in remaining steady when everything around him tried to shake him. And in that steadiness, he found something far more powerful than anger ever gave him: control, peace, and a quiet confidence that no one else could take away. And as this quiet confidence grew, Ethan started noticing changes in areas of his life he had never connected to anger before. His relationships became lighter because he no longer carried hidden tension into every conversation. His focus improved because his mind wasn't constantly replaying negative moments, and even his body felt different, as if a constant weight had been lifted from his chest. But the real transformation showed itself during moments that once would have broken him. Like the day a close friend betrayed his trust, something that would have once triggered days of rage and overthinking. Yet this time, he felt the familiar spark of anger rise, but instead of letting it consume him, he sat with it, observing it like he had practiced so many times before, recognizing the pain underneath it, the disappointment, the sense of being hurt. And rather than reacting outwardly, he chose to process it inwardly with honesty and control. And in doing so, he realized that anger had always been a shield, hiding deeper emotions. And once he faced those emotions directly, the need for anger began to fade even more. And from that point forward, he stopped seeing calmness as a technique and started seeing it as a way of living, a mindset where nothing external had the permission to disturb his inner state unless he allowed it. And this didn't mean life became perfect or that people suddenly treated him better, but it meant that their actions no longer dictated his peace. He could walk into chaos and remain centered. He could hear criticism without feeling attacked. And he could let go of things that once would have stayed in his mind for days. And people began to notice this shift. Some admired it, some didn't understand it, and some even tried to provoke him just to see if the old Ethan was still there. But he wasn't, because he had realized something they hadn't. That reacting is easy, but controlling your response is a skill. And once you develop that skill, you become untouchable in a way that doesn't require force or dominance, but instead comes from self-mastery. And over time, Ethan no longer needed to remind himself to stay calm. It became natural, like a default setting that replaced the old patterns. And in that state, he discovered a deeper truth. That peace is not something you find outside in perfect circumstances. It's something you build inside through awareness, patience, and practice. And once it's built, no one can take it from you unless you give them the power to do so. And that realization became the foundation of a life where anger no longer controlled him, but instead became just another emotion that came and went without leaving a mark.